I'm Oli Barrett, and over the next few weeks, I'm going to be travelling to meet the chief execs of some of the UK's most successful listed companies. I'm going to find out what drives them, about the challenges they've faced and what they've learned, and most of all, about the impact that they want to have on the world around them. Welcome to the Ambition Nation Listed 50. Today I'm in conversation with Nick Bolton, Chief Executive of Oxford Metrics. Nick, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an incredibly interesting company that you're leading. Just help us understand the range of what you're up to.
Sure. So I think the easiest way, and perhaps the best way to describe Oxford Metrics is that we are a technology group with a key focus on smart imaging technology. And that technology is applied to a series of vertical markets, most visibly in the entertainment space, but also within healthcare and also within engineering. And on the entertainment side, really, it's most visible because it's being used in TV and film production, video game production, from a wide variety of shows back from the day, from Titanic all the way through to, well, if you saw the press coverage last week about ABBA creating the virtual characters for the virtual stage show, that's all our technology being applied through Industrial Light and Magic, a long-term partner.
So in very broad brush terms, this is special effects. Just give us a sense of what you help a producer or a director to do that they couldn't do before.
Sure. So it's really to do with either tracking of movement. So then this is true in the healthcare side as well as it is with actors. I mean, the fact that we might be tracking a stick insect on a Monday at the university of this or that, you know, or a celebrity on a Friday for some video game or film. It's the same effectively homogeneous solution that provides that tracking capability. And what we're doing there is really measuring the thing that's moving. And sometimes that is a human being, and then we create a virtual character from that. Sometimes it's a human being pretending to be another creature. So in things like Planet of the Apes, where Andy Serkis is being mocapped, in order to apply those movements to create a computer graphic character. So in that instance, it's a human being tracked in order to create an ape. But it's used for tracking cameras themselves. So one of the great things on a show like The Mandalorian, they use this virtual production technique, where effectively in the old days you would have a green screen backdrop, where effectively you're changing out the backdrop in post-production by layering on effective computer graphics scene or perhaps a different live plate on top of that. Now they're running with LED walls behind us, and then on that LED wall we'll project a live computer graphics scene coming out of a games engine. So this is really this is the games technology now being applied to film and TV production.
Well, the other benefit, presumably, is that the producers would have to have waited a long time to see the fruits of their labour.
Yeah, and but there is just a plain cost argument here, in that it costs much more to fix something in post than if you can fix it on set in principal photography. It also really creates a completely different creative process. You get better performance. So it's then from a creative perspective, not just for us as actors, but also for the director behind the camera. That means effectively when they're looking at the monitor, they're getting effectively the live plate of what they're going to see in the final compositive shot that we'll go to cinemas to watch.
Incredible.
Rather than having to imagine the green screen and what that cityscape might look like behind them.
So let's go back to this range, because on the one hand you might be tracking whether it's the stick insect or the movie star, whatever it happens to be, but let's go to a completely different place, roads in Australia or traffic lights across Asia. Just give us a sense of that range.
So we have another application in exactly that space. We have software that takes sensed information from across an infrastructure network. So that might be an LED street light that's got an NO2, nitrous oxide monitor on top, or other particulate in the air. So it's taking that sensed information. It's also taking road survey information. So you effectively track, you've equipped this highly sophisticated £1 million vehicle with laser scanners on it and so forth, and they take 120, 150 measurement points every 10 centimetres down the road. All that data then all needs to be processed really to decide, well, where should we repair the road that's in front of us? It's much cheaper to fix a small hole than it is a large hole, but you can't go around fixing all the small holes all the time. But actually the processing all of that massive data set in order to equip the highways engineer with a better decision to make sure that road is effectively managed. That's a cost benefit analysis you have to take. We provide the software then that allows you to analyse exactly that.
Interesting. So on that on that sort of spectrum, presumably on the latter, your customers might involve governments?
Sure, yep, lots of governments, lots of contractors providing services to governments. I mean, clearly, public infrastructure is a government-owned asset. Typically, it might be run by a private business or loaned out to them, so they make sure they maintain it appropriately. So I think one of the nice things about the business is we have this nice balance between private funding, clearly video games companies like Ubisoft or Activision, they're very much a private business, and then also on the public side. And I think that balance, I would say, is a sort of a central thread that runs through the business. We're balanced in terms of the markets that we serve, we're balanced in terms of the hardware and software mix that we serve in there, we're balanced on the really hard science stuff, but also the touchy-feely application capability. And I think that balance is what gives us our strength then to be able to move forward.
When you've got such huge potential for a technology, and you've already talked about, in some ways, that spirit of cross-pollination between industries, how do you then decide what to focus on?
If you think about that culture engineering, as you saw, problem solving through science and technology, you have to really pursue those opportunities that have knocked on your door that show promise. Now, but assume that they won't all deliver on that promise. We've got our outliers of crazy, fantastic, super success, and we've got ones here which are disappointing, right? And so as an organisation, you can't flatten the risk profile on one side without flattening the risk reward profile on the other side.
Yeah, and presumably, in the potential of some of your technologies as they go into the public realm and some of your public sector clients, that's going to come with some much bigger discussions around what publics around the world will tolerate, will accept.
I think that there's a very strong sense of ethics within the business. So where there, clearly smart imaging capability can be used for both nefarious process as well as positive process, and I think we're very much guided by making sure that we see ourselves as a social actor. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we think it's appropriate for us to be a public company. But we see ourselves as a social actor, and therefore we need to do the right thing, right? And that's true well before ESG was ever coined as a concept.
Just say what you mean by that phrase, see yourself as a social actor. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by so that when we bring products to a marketplace, it should be broadly to the good of society and the good of the greater good of the world. But what it means is that when you're evaluating between choice A and choice B, and choice A is the path of the righteous and the good that will create social value, then we should definitely pursue that, right? And I think companies faced with those sort of moral or ethical dimensional decisions all the time. And come back to the point about public company. We are a public company. The great thing about public ownership from a societal perspective is that with a relatively small amount of capital, £50, you can open an ISA account and own one of our shares.
And have a voice.
And have a voice and have a share in the prosperity of the company as it moves forward. If you have more and more businesses moving from being PLCs into the private realm, it's a far smaller set of actors who will benefit from that. And that's not good, really. That's not good for our society. That's not good, I don't think, for capitalism. And I don't think that's good, really, for the companies then that operate within that environment.
So one of the choices you've made is to make acquisitions. So what has been your decision-making process? Because clearly you've got huge innovative, creative ability as a company, and yet you acquire others. So how do you make decisions?
So we're very careful about the way we make decisions. So we haven't made a lot of acquisitions over the past 5-10 years. But that's because really we've got these very strict criteria that we move by, because we're very much believers in when you make an acquisition, you risk the existing vessel. We apply those strict criteria, and we really focus on 3 things within that environment. The first thing is really about finding common culture, and so effectively we're bringing the folks on. We want to make sure that they think in the way that is the Oxford Metrics way, and there are enough of those businesses out there. Again, I think we've demonstrated in the past where we have made those acquisitions where there has been that strong cultural fit.
But that's a serious choice. So people first. Will the people fit?
Well, people and culture, and of course you can't just test that once. You have to test it multiple times. So in some ways, when you're doing those meetings where you're doing the financial due diligence, in lots of ways you're actually asking the meta question, which is how are these people? It's not about the numbers. It's how are these people thinking about those numbers?
Really interesting. So what other decisions are you making? What else are you looking for?
Sure. So the first one, as I say, is common culture, because if there isn't a fit there's no point in going on to the 2 and 3. On the 2 and 3, 2 is about collective leverage. So in other words, when we bring these 2 things together, do we create something that can create greater value? And that needs to be in a reasonable term. It doesn't have to be immediately, because in lots of ways there's sometimes a benefit to live and learn with a business that you've brought in. Just let it soak in for 18 months, see what happens, right? And then actually recognise, well, actually there's a talent issue here, if we could bring that in, or actually if we bring that together and that together, we can create this whole new exciting wealth. So that's the second point, is that sort of collective leverage, which can be it can be people, it can be market, it can be technology.
So final criteria.
And the final criteria really is fair value. You know, in other words, certainly in the current times, there's an awful lot of frothy value that's being created out there, and that I've got no interest in that. You know, we're building an organisation here that's built to endure, right? To stand, to live long after I'm gone. Finding that fair value in the current times has been a bit challenging, but invariably there will come a time.
So speaking of recent times, what about more recently on the acquisition trail? What's been going on?
So we recently bought a business, announced the acquisition of a German business called Contemplas last week, a business that we've known now for 15, 16 years. We've known the principals there for 20 years. Come back to point number one, was there a cultural fit? Absolutely, right? So what Contemplas do is they do something very similar to our motion measurement business, but they're experts in tracking from plain video, okay? So in those environments where you can't necessarily put a reflective marker on someone or put some other subject attached sensor, you just want to be able to track for video. Now it's not as accurate as you'll get with a subject attached marker.
Was that the one I saw with a swimming example?
And swimming is really a niche that they almost dominate. So in the run up to, especially in the run up to the Tokyo Olympics, there's a series of teams that were all training using their technology. And so in that environment, they'll have underwater cameras looking at the way that someone will do a tumble turn, looking at the stroke pattern of the particular swimmer, and then using that to provide the coach with better information. Actually, how can they improve the biomechanics or or other aspects of the performance, for the swimmer in that context.
Why did it take you so long to buy that business?
A purchase is a two-sided process, right? You have to want to sell as well as the person who wants to buy. And I think we've actually had a strategic investment in them over that time, and monitoring really how they've been getting on. But equally, the two founders really enjoyed the independence that brought. But they now recognise, and I think you're seeing this across all of our markets, that there's a secular change going on where that ability to measure things from all sorts of different varieties of sensor is all growing, right? So if you look at the growth of the motion capture business over the past 5 years, it's been double digit, and it hasn't been double digit for the 10 years previous to that. They're seeing a similar sort of discontinuous growth going on inside their marketplace, and they recognised they wanted some accelerated capital to bring that forward. So that was a straightforward conversation to have then. We both saw that in the marketplace, and it's all being driven broadly by this coming of the augmented age. It's not up for debate really. The augmented age is this idea that we partner, human beings partner with machines to undertake and achieve more than we can achieve alone. But effectively it means that degree of augmentation means that we now need machines to be able to understand us as well as we understand each other.
Let's talk a bit more about being a public company. Are there particular benefits that come with being in that position that you notice?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can almost be summarised by writing in big block capitals, liquidity. Yeah, and what I mean by liquidity there is effectively the freedom as a business. I can go and raise money to organically invest in my business. Yeah, sure, I've got to make sure I justify why we're raising the money, and it might be equity based or it might be debt based, but I can go and raise the money. So liquidity on that side, liquidity to then make acquisitions, right? So coming back to the point, one of the nice things about acquisitions where you've got paper is that you can have, especially where you're bringing in a company that might still have growth ahead of it, you can effectively say, well, if you believe in the growth ahead of it and you're going to be using our horsepower in part to help drive that, take some shares, right? And that will raise, you'll get the benefit of being part of that large group. So definitely useful in acquisitions, useful for retaining and incentivizing employees, right? Because they're not stuck, they're not having to wait for a liquidity event, they're not having to wait for the business to be sold or the business owners to get to 65 and then decide then they want to sell it.
What about on a global stage? You've got some incredibly renowned clients around the world. Prestige that goes with being a listed company?
I think it helps in those instances. I still think in the specific markets that we serve, so if we're trying to sell to a particular games company, they care much more about the benefit that your product can bring them in their world. And I think and more than that, as we're being asked more questions in those procurements about our socially responsible policies, about our impact on the environment more broadly, again, those things actually become audited as a public company, and so that's a straightforward thing just to point them out at the annual report.
So the last 18 months can't have been easy. Tell me a little bit about how you faced up some of those big challenges. On the one hand, you've had Brexit, we've had a whole, obviously, COVID pandemic. Tell me what's happened.
It's been an unusual 18 months, I would say. I mean, I would break out those two things. They are very different things, and the impacts they're having on us and our organisation, our customers and our world are also very different. If I pick up, the easier of those to pick up is really the Brexit one, because that is, and for us, that's just an annoyance. I mean, software is zero rated from a tariff perspective, and I would much rather, an awful lot of the debate around Brexit is around tariffs. It's not about that. It's about the friction for trade. That's much more important. Right now, we've got this reintroduced friction of trade, actually, without yet have any of the benefits of being able to trade outside that European groups.
Let's move on. The COVID pandemic. I mean, I can imagine on the one hand, in healthcare, never a greater focus on solving these huge problems, very differently, but nevertheless in your core business, the movie industry. I mean, surely we've been consuming huge amounts. There's been a lot of, anyway, let me not analyse it. You tell me what's happened.
Well, I think you need to think about those in two different areas. One is about, when the pandemic broke, where were we? What could we do to make sure that people were safe fundamentally, and that as employees, customers, and more broadly in our community? Are there things that we could contribute to? So we know an awful lot about global supply chain, we know an awful lot about control electronics. So we got involved in a number of the ventilator projects on the back of that. But more, underpinning that was effectively a confidence and a surety that we were going to be okay. And I think the lesson that we'd really learned from 2008, 2009, although we've always been a debt-free organisation, was make sure you've got some more money in the bank to deal with those black swan events. So we actually went into this that period with more money in the bank than we'd ever had. And so that means that the message for the chief executive could come down was genuinely true, that we were going to be okay. We didn't take any government money. No one was going to be laid off. There would be no furloughing. I think this is, again, testimony to our organisation, but almost most organisations, and the way everybody's responded, is that human ingenuity in the face of challenge is incredible and hugely life-affirming, right? And I think we saw that. We shouldn't forget that either as a society, of what April and May and June looked like. And yes, I know it's now all a bit of pain still with masks and so forth, but we came through that, and I think we should feel ourselves as strong as a society having come through that. And then the other aspect then really to the pandemic is, well, what's then changed in our marketplace? Because we've seen businesses like Zoom really accelerate over that time. What's that meant for us and our markets? And I think we have seen a number of trends that were there already, but they've significantly accelerated. The idea of telemedicine has definitely accelerated. So, from the base GP appointments that are happening via video conferencing. That's good for us in general, telehealthcare, because that's a space where if you can remotely measure someone or understand someone and track them and so forth, then effectively the medic doesn't need to be in the same room as you at that time. So that's been an acceleration. On the entertainment side, yes, we've all been binge watching shows, so there's been more money flowing into those multi-episodic TV productions, which again is good for us. But also the rise of, over that time, of virtual production. How can we use technology in order to reduce the folks on set to create effectively just as lustrous and exciting visual entertainment, but actually do it with effectively a lower concentration of people singularly on set at any one point in time, and virtual production has absolutely seen that. And then the last one is remote working. So that meant we saw a massive take up in our mobile software that was leveraging our SaaS-based software on that side. So those three trends have only been accelerated, and that's actually good for us because our competition isn't in the same place on those three trends, and so that's why we're seeing a boost to our trading through the first half of this fiscal year, and hopefully going forward from here.
So Nick, bearing in mind everything that's then been happening in the world and to the business, how have you chosen to change your plans as a result of all of that?
So I think in terms of what the last 18 months have been, again, I'd still come back to the point, which is that we are only on a stronger platform now than we stood as we entered this whole process. So we still sit on a significant portion of cash, and I make no bones about that. That gives us deployable capital to undertake the opportunities that are in front of us, as well as to make sure that we're protected for whatever the world might bring. We're redoubling our efforts on looking at both the organic development on that side as well as the inorganic development side. So in other words, making sure that we're behind those trends. We're repurposing some of the money that we might have spent more broadly into investing in trends. So virtual production is a great example of that. That opportunity is right now, and our customers are making increased exciting use of that technology. But it also means that they're finding out that we need to invest and change some things about the way we do it. So we want to prioritise on that basis. There are clear acquisitions where effectively we can find technology that augments our existing capability, but then also opens up new TAM, new total addressable market, new marketplaces for us. And so we're on that side, we're very much redoubling our efforts. The other thing I would say is also supply chain risk, which of course is something that you're seeing the odd headline about now. Clearly it's affecting the automotive industry. We made a conscious decision about 5 years ago to, in lots of ways, reshore our supply chain. So there's an awful lot actually that comes from within the UK or is relatively near-shored. So the castings come from Andover, right? Whereas they used to come from China. Plastics come from here in the UK as well. So we've been managing that process, but I think we've got to recognise that we're doing a big drains up on the supply chain more broadly. Where does risk lie? Where does social and environmental impact lie within that? And what can we do to better improve that?
So how about the challenges that now face you?
Yeah.
How do you see those? What would you, if I asked you to pick the 2 or 3 biggest challenges as chief exec, what are they?
For me, they're always challenges that relate to opportunities rather than stormy clouds over the horizon. That's really to do with, we work in technology, we've got great people within there, we've got great customers who are long-standing. So I think for us, it's about then making sure what are the strategic choices we make that allow us to be driving that train rather than be a passenger on that train. And some of that's about operational decisions that we make. An awful lot of it is about acquisitions. How do we find those right acquisitions? But I think it's that if you ask me what keeps me awake at night, it's not wanting to be the company that missed the opportunity.
There are such huge areas of opportunity, right? So in entertainment, in healthcare, the governments you serve around the world. How do you think those will play out as these vast areas of opportunity? Clearly there are overlaps between them, but are you looking to push one over the others?
No, so I think the way we've got to make sure that we're open for opportunity, and there are ways that you can be open for opportunity without necessarily being direct into that opportunity, right? So yes, I want my entertainment business that works with the largest studios to carry on, and we have a direct relationship with those. We've got the office in LA for those obvious reasons. UK, as you know, is a great centre for that as well. So there are those direct opportunities, but actually this idea where our technologies of use to other parties who've got other positive characteristics, that means they can then serve their end market, the need-based manufacturer and so forth. I think that's a way that we can actually extend the reach of the organisation without actually too much risk, but also with a much greater set of opportunity. The great example of that is in location-based entertainment. So there are location-based entertainment is the cinema, the theatre, but there are now these new businesses that are popping up where you'll go to an entertainment centre. So it might be a unit. There's a unit actually just down Blackfriars Bridge called Electric Game Box. We've got 13 different partners now that are rolling out those sort of location-based entertainment. So there's a great startup in the US called Dreamscape Immersive, where you actually wear VR headsets. 6 of us go into this environment. You then go, it's a wonderful journey. You go on this journey to stand on a spacecraft that whizzes you up to this planet where they've gathered together all of the aliens from across the universe that are endangered, and you can then go and experience them. You're not really, you're in a shed in LA, right, or in a shopping centre. So it's really one of very few VR experiences I ever engaged in where I had a complete suspension of disbelief.
So give us another sense of what's to come in terms of the developments.
I think that's going to explode. So the point is we're talking about relatively modest projects, Blackfriars Bridge, Ealing and so forth. I think you can see that much more broadly. In the same way that you're seeing things like happening in retail, the self-checkout store that Amazon have brought in, well, there are other technology providers that are doing that similar thing. All of that is the growth of smart imaging. So I think for what we're trying to make sure is that we're as sectorally well exposed as we possibly can be, but without being then diluted too strongly. And again, that comes from being direct in those markets that we know well and indirect in those that we don't. Because invariably, you mentioned it already, the blue chip nature of our customer base, it means that if it's not us working on those opportunities, our customers already are. So then it's really about making sure that our technology doesn't just stop at the R&D department, but actually gets deployed out into the real world, into the live theatre of real life. That's a great opportunity.
What about a totally different part of your business? You're managing, particularly if you're looking at infrastructure data, huge amounts of data around the world. What are the challenges that are now starting to emerge around that part of the business?
Yes, and that's an important parallel between the two businesses, that they both deal with high bandwidth digital data. data. So bandwidth is not just the size of the packets, but also the speed they come at you. Half of the UK streetlights, right, are managed inside our software in one way, shape or form. And that's just one type of asset. Now you multiply that by all the litter bins and the curbstones and the black stuff we drive on and the white lines and the yellow lines, and here in London, the double red lines and so forth, right? So all of that data, some of it might be coming at you 10 times a second, right? So when people talk about big data or the rise of data and the sort of new innovative business models it can create, or how do you manage that, it's too easy to think of that as a static lump of data. It ain't static, right? The point is that actually you've got to deal with the fire hose of that volume of data. And the great thing is that that's not just a Oxford Metrics problem, that's actually a problem for a whole bunch of people. So the great thing about the cloud providers is they're solving lots of those problems for you, and the ecosystem around that. So clearly we know about the Google Clouds and the AWS and the Azure, they're probably the three leaders in that space. But even within those, there are these wonderful ecosystems of people providing tools within that space that can help manage that. We get to leverage all of that.
How about this idea of sustainability around being a positive force? Having a positive impact on the planet. How do you approach that?
Words aren't enough, right? Actions are what matters. And I am, I'm always very interested in a broad set of industries, right? So I try to make sure that my networks operate not just inside tech, but inside others. And there are some tremendous things going on inside sustainability, both in not-for-profits as well as for-profits.
Yeah, but having said that, isn't the challenge, though, that you will find people, I'm generalizing, working around and in software who say, well, we're not smelting anything. We haven't got factories belching smoke out into the atmosphere. We're software, for goodness sake.
Sure, but there's still...
That's a misconception.
No, but there's still a sustainability impact there, right? So when you write that line of code, so let's just think on that basis, right? And you write a crummy piece of code that some person's now going to unpick. Actually, someone else, it turned out when it was used in that hospital on that set, it turned out they couldn't do what they wanted to. They caused a day's delay. That caused an extra day's worth of carbon impact of that set and so forth. So being very careful about when you write that, being very careful and considered about your approaches by which you manage and store data, because every single packet you send there is a carbon footprint associated with that. So there are still mindsets that you can adopt, I think, that can adjust that, and even down to the way that you think about communication, the way that you do or don't get on aeroplanes. And we still need our governments to set much tighter sets of parameters by which we need to act as human beings and organisations in that world. We can still offer a cultural approach across the business about making sure that we do think about the impact of the code that we write, the decisions that we make.
How do you, as a chief exec, find time to think, to reflect, to make the best decisions that you need to make?
In lots of ways, you're trying to spend your time making the right decisions about the system that needs to make the right decisions. And I don't always get that, I do get that, but in general, those decisions are actually relatively long time frame decisions. Is this person in the right role? Have we set up the right levels of authority and responsibility and so forth? So I like to read and be well informed in around our business and more broadly and so forth. But that's just my role as a good citizen inside the organisation, and the other 240 people have got exactly the same sets of responsibilities and the same sets of input as well.
I think that listening to you today, a lot of your existing success is through great conversation with clients, because through that conversation you discover the right problem to solve.
Well, we definitely recruit for communication skills, full stop. So if you look across all of our business, there are an awful lot of engineers, and again, I'll fight for engineering till I die. It's too easy to write engineers up as somehow just interested in the metal or interested in the ones and the zeros, and that's absolutely not. Engineers are problem solvers, and the way you solve problems is you ask people stupid questions. When we recruit, we're recruiting for those skills. So in someone in support, we're not just hiring someone who can just deal with the customer and the interaction. We're actually hiring highly qualified engineers who we really hope to go on to have a deep and meaningful, powerful, critical conversation with a client.
It cuts both ways though, doesn't it? Because you want to create the conditions where your clients and next clients aren't afraid to come to you with the problem that they might sometimes be embarrassed to have.
No, that is true. And the challenge of the movie industry is there's an awful lot of egos that sometimes float around that industry that doesn't necessarily feel a completely psychological safe environment, but you still have got to make sure you do have that degree of innovation, because what happens on set needs to be solved, right?
Yeah, well, from stick insects to swimmers and ski jumpers to Planet of the Apes, I think people might watch this, Nick, and think you've got a great job.
I have the best job.
It is an extraordinary organisation. Nick Bolton, Chief Executive of Oxford Metrics, thank you very much.